Well, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in week one of our new series called Ekklesia. And what we're doing is we're just going to spend a couple of weeks talking about the church, the way the church came about, the way the church functions currently, and God's big purpose for the church. And so today I am joined by Lisalette Hammond, who is the director of our women's ministries here at Sea Life. And we just wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about the church. And so, one of the things about the church is that it's always kind of, especially to an outsider, okay, so whenever I was growing up, we didn't go to church a whole lot. And there was always something sort of mystifying about the church. It was kind of this place that you would go, and that's where all the good people went and whatever else. And whenever I finally went as a kid, I can remember being so surprised that you weren't allowed to run, you weren't allowed to eat anything in the Holy of Holies. You weren't allowed to speak loudly. It was almost like, okay, anything that would be fun and enjoyable, you're not allowed to do in here. And so it was kind of overwhelming. You were raised Catholic. And so there was even more, I guess, kind of high church feeling. Tell us a little bit about kind of your impression as a kid of the church as you saw it.
I think our church was a little unique to Catholic churches. Our priest was real, all the kids up on the altar, it was a fun place, I guess. He would tell jokes, so it was a little different than most. But we still had we had to act in like a reverential way. We had to have a certain posture. We had to sit up in the pew, and when we got out into the aisle, we had to genuflect, do the sign of the cross, because you were passing by where the presence of God was, it was what we were told. And so we just couldn't chew gum an hour before we would take our communion, and there was a lot of... Oh,
really? I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, so it was like a fasting time, so even gum was...
Oh, a fast. I could do it for an hour.
Yeah, no,
that's the kind of fast I need to be a part of right there, yeah.
So there was a lot of rules like that, and we didn't really know why we were doing it. We just knew that that's kind of, when you got there, that's what you did.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's kind of what we want to talk about over the course of this series, is because I think all of us can understand where there is at very least a perceived or the perception that, hey, we need to be reverential when we come in to worship a holy God. And I think we should all agree that the attitude, the posture of our heart needs to be in awe of the goodness of God. But in some ways, we've made much of, I think in the Western church in particular, maybe other places in the world, but we've made much of the buildings. We've made much of the location, that this is where church happens. And so over these weeks, what we want to do is just begin to kind of systematically tear that apart and look at it to say, okay, have we lost the church somewhere along the way in trying to protect the church? And I think maybe we have. And so we want to redefine, I guess, or better define what the church actually is. In the Old Testament, God was among the people, which was a great gift to them, that he was among them, but there was still distance between the people and God. And only, the high priest was allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. And so, there was just kind of this big gap that existed between the two. And so when Jesus was born, what the scripture tells us is that he was called Emmanuel, God with us. And that seemed to be a game changer. How do you, whenever you kind of reflect back on the history of Christianity and the birth of Christ and the gap prior to the birth of Christ between people and God, and then Jesus, here he is in the flesh, how do you see that as a game changer for the church, or in what way do you feel like it impacted the future of the church?
Well, God was this desired being. They desired to be in a relationship with him, but he was untouchable. I mean, you couldn't, even where God was, where his presence was, you didn't want to touch it, whatever that was. You didn't want to go there. You couldn't even, where his presence was going to be, if it was on a mountain, you couldn't even touch the mountain, sort of thing. So he was desired by them, but they just didn't really have access to him. Not everybody had access. And so I think what really changes, what is amazing, is that what was probably hard for them to believe was, wow, I actually have access to this God. How is it possible that this God who's so almighty and the creator of all things would actually be in our presence? I think that for some people for some of the religious people, may have even been like hard to chew.
Yeah,
you know,
a little bit of a put off
right,
in some
like,
ways.
There's no way our holy God could be in the midst of us and of us broken people, you know. So I think it was a huge game changer, and for some people a relief, and for some people really like almost seeming just impossible.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because in some ways, if we're not careful, maybe in the modern church we might accidentally, with all the rules, and that might be kind of a cool thing for groups to talk about, it, all the rules that you had growing up in church, what you could do and what you couldn't do. But I wonder if maybe if we're not careful, what we do is we actually revert back to a God is distant kind of mentality, that we collectively come to this place to do our church thing with the hope somehow that we will appease God, that we will, he'll give us a star by our name, or you know, check something off of a list. When really through the birth of Christ, he's like, I'm with you in this. I'm with you not just on Sunday. I'm with you on Monday. I understand what it feels like to work hard. I understand what it feels like to sweat. I understand what it feels like to be heartbroken. I understand what it feels like to, you know, go through all the different things that you, as my creation, go through. And if we're not careful, maybe we distance ourselves even again. You know, one of the passages that we talked about in the message is 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16. It says, "Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you?" And I think that was another massive shift. So you had God among them in the Holy of Holies, separated, you know, only certain people got in. And, you know, in some ways it was really cool if you were that person, but it was also terrifying because you might die.
Yeah,
you know?
They would tie the rope to his ankle just in case it didn't come out, you know?
Yeah, I just don't know that you'd want to be that guy.
Yeah,
I mean, as cool as it is to say, hey, I survived it, talk to God, you know, that kind of thing. But Jesus, you know, after he was born, so that was God among them and then God with them. But what this is saying is that now God dwells in his people. And that is a massive shift for the church. Why do you think God being in us is such an important thing for believers to understand?
Well, it's when you really think about that truth, it's unreal. If you really think about the fact that the God of creation, the God who created everything, dwells within us, that's overwhelming to really think about. And I think the reason it should be overwhelming is because you see that it's like, okay, if God is perfect, if I believe that, and if he is within me as a believer, then should my life look a little different now with him in me as a believer, since I crossed that line of faith, than it did before? And so if we don't understand that reality, that once we place our faith in him, once we cross that line of faith, that's true. He is within us. And, you know, you hear a lot of, or I've heard a lot of people say, you know, I need to get my life right. I need to go to church. Where church is a great thing. Come on, keep coming. But that's not what changes us. What really changes us is this truth, is that he desires to come inside of us and change us from the inside out. You know, I think that is remarkable, and it's also refreshing, because it's an impossible battle if we're just trying to change ourselves and change our natural desires. And so it should be refreshing to the believer that he desires to come in and change you from the inside out, and he gives us all power over sin, you know?
You know, it's kind of, I was just thinking, it's kind of one of those things, it's easy to put yourself through a little bit of a litmus test to say, do I really believe that Christ is in me, and that I represent the holiness of God to a lost, dying, decaying world everywhere I go? Because everywhere I go, I take the Spirit of God with me. Do you really believe that? And I think the easiest way to test it would be, okay, so what behaviors are different on Sunday when you're at the church than they are on Monday morning when you're at the office or on the job site or in the classroom or whatever? And if you just kind of skate by that really quickly, you probably wouldn't be like, oh, I'm basically the same person. Are the words that come out of your mouth the same? Are there things that you would very easily say at work that you would never, ever say at church.
Or in front of a pastor.
Or in front of a oh yeah, but you want to see people freak out, walk into a restaurant and up on a conversation, and they're like,
move a drink away.
Yeah,
or
and I'm like,
something.
nah, it's all, So yeah, no, it is. It's just very interesting how, and I think that's a good way to kind of do a heart check, is to say, how am I different at that building than I am everywhere else in my life? And so that would be a good thing, I think, for groups to talk about, and hopefully you've developed enough rapport and trust with each other. This is one of those moments where I think you could maybe spend a little bit of time confessing, hey, here's who I am Monday through Saturday that I don't want people on Sunday to know about.
Right.
And don't feel that as any type of shame or condemnation, because I think what's going to happen here is God's going to set you free and to realize that you are the church, and that you carry with you the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit of God, into all of these circumstances. And again, whether it's at work or home or whatever else, that Monday through Saturday version of you needs to be consistent with the Sunday version of you. If you're a believer, that there's a responsibility to say, I've got the Holy Spirit of God in me. So the tagline, and we'll kind of close with this, the tagline of this series is "Stop Going to Church," which honestly sounds a little offensive or shocking. I don't know, there's something about it which is why we went with it. Whenever you hear "stop going to church," obviously just on the surface that feels like we're saying, hey, just quit going to church, which we're not saying, okay, because we're pro-church by this definition. But why is it, although it sounds offensive, in your opinion, why is it correct to encourage believers to stop going to church?
Well, it's kind of, as a former athlete, I'll say former because there's not much athleticism going on now.
I understand that world.
But it's like if I showed up to practice and was just there and contributed in no way, or in the same way to a game, just showed up and did nothing, put in no work outside of it or there, and that's not what my coach would want. It's not what my teammates would want. And I think that's kind of the same thing, we don't, by this definition of the church, what the church really means is for us to not just go to church, but to actually be the church, if we really believe that God is, in fact, inside of us as believers, then I think we should get excited about what he can do in and through us. I think it's really awesome that he doesn't just want to use us. He also allows us to see what he's doing, and it is so cool to allow ourselves to just sit and listen, be still, and listen to the Holy Spirit and let him guide us, and to be a part of what God is doing. It's so cool. And I wanted to say, when you were talking about the Monday through Saturday life, I think sometimes it can be really discouraging when we have trouble acting the same way that we do on a Sunday or in front of a pastor, is that's another reason why we need the community, the body of believers, because there is accountability when we are with each other. And so that's all the more reason to do life with each other and be the church with each other.
That's a good point. Yeah. Whenever you say stop going to church and be the church, just as a little thing we've done in our family with our kids. And honestly, our motive was different when we started. We didn't want our kids growing up bitter toward the institution of the church. And if every time Dad wasn't at home or at something, we're like, well, he's at the church, then we were afraid. So we just always referred to it as he's at work or he's, at the office or whatever. But as they've gotten older, we found another value in that we don't refer to the buildings as the church. We talk about the Kaufman campus or the Forney campus or the Sunnyvale campus. We just refer to it as campuses because what we want them to leave our home knowing is that campuses come and go, but the church is going to be around forever, and that they are a part of that church. And it's a bigger thing than just community life. And so we want them to stop going to church. We want them to be the church and to realize that that's going to go with them from this point forward. So anyway, we hope that this conversation has been helpful to you, and we hope that the conversation that you have in your groups will be not only beneficial but life-changing as you begin to realize what it means to actually be the church.